Hey guys, how's it going? Value Venture Investing here today. So, Apple did it again. Apple delivered the goods. What amazing quarter. There's a couple little caveats that we're going to go over, but today we're going to talk about Apple's Q2 2021 earnings. We're going to quickly go through their earnings. I'm going to give you some insights that I got from the conference call, and then give you my opinion at the end. Taking a look at the stock after hours when they announced these results, the stock was on a tear. I think at one point it was up about 5%. Now we're looking at about 2% or so. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. I think I know why it's not reacting a little bit stronger with such phenomenal results. Quickly going through these here, the top line revenue was $89.58 billion, and the estimate was just over $77 billion. Huge beat. And this was 54% growth year over year. Now, the one thing we have to keep in mind with all this stuff, even though these numbers are phenomenal, is that a lot of, say iPhone revenue and a couple different things come from China, Greater China. And keep in mind, this was like March, the end of March last year. So they were just kind of coming, they were one of the first countries that went into lockdowns. So this is why you're seeing this huge difference, when things have improved significantly. Still amazing numbers, but just something to keep in mind going forward. Just think about where we were a year ago. EPS was $1.40 versus 99 cents, just killing it again. Gross margin was 42.5%. Estimate was only 39.8, so the gross margins are still extremely strong. Now, in terms of the product categories, iPhone revenue was $47.9 billion versus $41.5 billion. That was up 66% year over year. Keep in mind, a large portion of this is in China, but still, everywhere else, it's still huge growth. iPad revenue was $7.8 billion versus $5.6 billion. That was up 79% year over year. Likewise, Mac was extremely impressive, $9.1 billion versus an estimate of $6.8 billion. That was up over 70%. These two product categories, iPad and Mac, were all-time records. So that's pretty amazing, I think, the life of the company, that they set all-time records in this quarter. The Mac and the iPad 2 now have the M1 chip. If you don't follow Apple too closely, I think this is going to be a game changer. We're starting to see it reflect a little bit in the Mac. They have it in the MacBook Air and the smaller MacBook Pros. They just released the iMac as well with the M1, and then soon they're going to be coming with the M2 or the M1X or whatever they call it, and it's going to be a game changer. These right now, if you don't know much about them, look into them. They are literally, I think, in my opinion, going to kill every competitor out there in terms of power efficiency and power. They're just crazy. So these are two, specifically Mac. I think we've seen this grow for a couple quarters. I think this is going to be phenomenal going forward. The powerhouse services, $16.9 billion. See, this is where you start seeing that maybe iPhone revenue, even though it's doing phenomenal, isn't going to be so important going forward. Like, look at just services and Mac. Pretty soon the two of these are just going to be $30 billion or plus dollars in revenue in a quarter. For say the second quarter, that's huge. The estimate was $15.57 billion. Huge beat, and every quarter we see this just grow in double-digit growth, and it's that is amazing. And a lot of that has to do with the strong install base with their iPhones and their other products. Wearables, home, and accessories was $7.83 billion versus $7.79 billion. So a beat there as well. So let's take a look at their financial statements quickly right now. So of course, this is for the second quarter of 2021. So the 3 months ended up to March. And here they're doing the year over year. They're not doing sequentially, they're doing year over year, because that's a relevant way to compare it. Again, total net sales were $89.5 billion versus $58.3 billion a year ago. Huge difference. Look at the difference in products. Look at the difference in services. The gross margin, again, was $38 billion versus $22.3 billion. Huge significant difference from last year. Again, I always point out the research and development, $5.2 billion in a quarter. That's a lot of money. And they increased that from year over year, $4.5 billion. So when you drop down to the bottom line here, net income was $23.6 billion versus $11.2 billion. That's a huge increase in net income year over year. The diluted earnings per share, $1.40, like I said, and that's compared to 64 cents a year ago. It's always very interesting to look at the net sales by reportable segment, and no matter what reportable segment you look at, you can pause the screen here if you want, they've just killed it. Americas is 34 billion versus 25. Europe, 22 billion versus 14. And the one that we were talking about, Greater China, look at that difference. Almost double, I'd say. $7.7 billion versus 9.4 billion. So here you can kind of get the idea about what I was talking about at the beginning of this video in terms of, you know, restrictions coming into place and things locking down. That had a huge portion of it. Japan, 7.7 billion versus 5.2 billion. And of course, the rest of the Asia Pacific was unreal as well. And that gives us the same total net sales. If you look at in terms of the net sales by category, again, here's the iPhone. You can see how it just killed it. $47 billion versus $28 billion a year ago. Mac, like I said, something to be watching. Just over $9 billion versus only $5.3 billion a year ago. And the iPad growing incredibly well, almost coming close to doubling as well, just like the Mac here, 7.8 billion versus 4.3 billion. Wearables didn't grow quite as much, but still some phenomenal growth. And again, services here, just a year ago was at 13.3 billion in Q2, and now we're at 16.9 billion. Wow. Taking a look at their balance sheet, I usually don't look at too much here. I look at it, but I don't go through it with you guys. Because in terms of their cash, I think they have a net cash position of $80 billion or something, because they've taken on a lot of debt strategically, and they would like to be net cash neutral in the near future. But they got about I think it's $203 billion in cash right now. Of course, that includes cash and cash equivalents, marketable securities, and marketable securities that are classified as non-current as well. I always like to point that out to you guys as well, because you know, some of those are in stocks, marketable securities. You know, in terms of their balance sheet here, investing activities, I like to always see what they're doing in terms of purchasing marketable securities. They actually purchased quite a bit relative to a year ago. So again, maybe they're taking advantage of the markets in the first three quarters of the year here. 74.4 billion versus 66.4 billion. In terms of their financing activities, I always like to look at the payments of dividends and their repurchases of their common stock. Over $7 billion they paid out to shareholders in this quarter, and they've also upped the repurchases of common stock, and we're going to get into this in a little second here, significantly to over $43 billion versus only $39 billion a year ago. So now taking a look at a couple things that I gleaned from their conference call. It wasn't particularly long, so there wasn't that much that I pulled out of it. Again, you've probably heard that they increased their dividend by 7% this quarter, which I love as a shareholder. And something that I picked up that maybe a lot of people didn't pick up on is that they're going to have continued growth. Yearly, they plan to up that dividend. So Apple in the future could become, you know, a very high yielding dividend payer perhaps. Something great to know. They also authorized $90 billion in share repurchases, something that they continue to do, and it's nice to see that they're even doing it in this environment. Going forward, they're going to be boosting that EPS, buying back those shares. Like I said, they have over $204 billion in cash. And the only other thing that was very notable that I think you guys should be aware of for next quarter is Q3 is always sequentially, meaning from the last quarter, a decline, right? Because Apple has seasonality. The iPhone comes out, you know, it sells really good. Then seasonality falls off around Christmas. We have a huge, you know, jump, stuff like that. June quarter, they expect strong double-digit growth, which is phenomenal. However, they expect sequentially it to decline more than in previous years. So sequentially, meaning from this quarter, they expect the decline to be greater than it usually is that time of year. Now, that's something that might frighten a lot of investors, but they said there's some good reasons behind it. One of the good reasons is that they released their iPhone 12 at a different time, right? So because of that iPhone peaking their sales numbers at a different time, their sales mix, if you would like to call it, for the timeline, I'm not too sure exactly what they call it, is going to be, it's going to vary. It's going to be a little bit different. They're also facing supply constraints as well. So that's something to keep in mind next quarter. You know, maybe analysts might be pointing this out or something, but it's nothing bad, and it's just something to be expected. So in terms of this quarter, you guys know I love Apple, and I feel like, again, like I think I said in my last video, I feel like a broken record every time they blow it out of the water, and it's just phenomenal. And hopefully the stock one of these days reflects it. I think the recent pull down or drawback in the stock has been a little illogical. A lot of it has had to do with, quite frankly, people thinking yields might go up, and that hits tech stocks and a lot of different things. So there's been a lot of different pullbacks. But I think we might see it, you know, it might drop a little bit like it did after hours here, and it might run back up to all-time highs here. Kind of hard for it to not at these numbers, but again, Apple seems to always fall after a phenomenal quarter. But as you guys know, I'm long. I hold the stock long-term. I'd love to know if you guys hold it too, what your guys' thoughts are on the quarter, maybe specifically what you think about, you know, this 54% growth, and, you know, and specifically how it relates to China, and us comparing it to that quarter last year as well. What your thoughts are on that, and what your thoughts are on the company going forward. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe the video. Always helps the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.